Thank you so much for being here. My name is Lisa Kretz, if you haven't met me yet, and I'm the director of the ethics program here at the University of Evansville. On behalf of the Department of Philosophy and Religion and my colleagues who teach in the program, welcome to the 9th annual ethics lecture, which was renamed in 2015 as the William R. Connolly Ethics Lecture on behalf of our colleague, friend, and benefactor of the lecture series, Professor Emeritus Dick Connolly, who is in the room. Dr. Connolly has been an integral part of the ethics program and remains an active contributor to the department campus activities. It's due to his generosity that we are able to host the lecture series tonight. So can you join me in a round of applause? Now, it's my honor and privilege to introduce Dr. Rory Dickson. Dr. Dickson is an assistant professor for the Religion and Culture Department at the University of Winnipeg with a specialization in Islamic studies. His research focuses on contemporary Islam and Sufism in North America. In 2015, Dr. Dickson's first book, Living Sufism in North America Between Tradition and Transformation, was published, in which he explores the ways in which Sufi leaders in North America relate to Islamic orthodoxy, authority, and gender. In 2017, the book Unveiling Sufism, From Manhattan to Mecca, that Dr. Dickson co-wrote, was published. Most recently, so his third book, most recently, Dr. Dickson collaborated on the book Contemporary Sufism, Piety, Politics, and Popular Culture. Additionally, Dr. Dickson has published numerous articles and book chapters about contemporary Muslim thought and has presented his research at a number of national and international conferences. Tonight, we have the pleasure of hearing Dr. Dickson speak on the topic of Islam and the challenge of E Pluribus Unum. Please join me in a warm round of applause to welcome our speaker, Dr. Dickson.
Good evening, everyone. It is a distinct pleasure and honor to be here in Evansville with you. I first want to thank Professor Lisa Kretz and everyone at the Department of Philosophy and Religion for inviting me. And also, I want to thank Dr. Connolly for creating such a rich legacy that more junior scholars like myself can engage with that legacy. I also want to thank Professor Rachel Brown and Mark Kellerman for kindly hosting me and continuing to make me a part of their wonderful family. Their son Eli deserves a special mention here as my drawing, snacking, and watching Moana buddy on this trip. I finally want to thank everyone here for taking the time out of your busy weeks as we're getting into sort of late semester to come out this evening and hear this talk. And if you do have any questions about the talk, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but there's my email, w.dickson@uwinnipeg.ca. Please do feel free to send me an email if you have any questions of clarification or you want to discuss some of the issues that we've talked about here today further. Also, I like sending people articles. So if you say, look, I want to read up more on that, I can geek out and send you a bunch of articles to read on an aspect of the talk that you're interested in. Okay, so here's sort of a breakdown of what we'll be covering today. We'll do a bit of an introduction. I'll give you a sense of how I'm going to be framing the subject and introduce this question of Islam in America. Of course, just introduce the question. It's a big one. To deal with this question of Islam and the challenge of E Pluribus Unum, we'll be focusing to some degree on Abdelkader al-Jazairi, who's quite a famous figure, as we'll see, actually here in the United States as well, which is a very interesting story for how he became famous in the United States. And we'll learn a little bit about who he is, who he was. And then in the last part, we'll talk about this idea of Islamic pluralism or resources within Islam for pluralism and how some of these ideas might be relevant to our lives here today and some of the social problems that we're currently dealing with. So, and when we're doing that, I should say, we'll be talking about a figure named Ibn al-Arabi, who's a very famous Muslim thinker, philosopher, saint, and we'll get into some of his work, which I find quite interesting, and I hope you as well. And I should say after the talk we'll have a question period, so if you do have any questions, do feel free to ask and we can talk about it after the lecture part is concluded. Okay, so we're eventually going to get to Abdelkader, Iowa. Okay, so just giving you a sense of maybe our first stop on the talk. So to begin, this Latin phrase, E Pluribus Unum, how many people have heard this phrase before? Quite a few of you, as one might expect. Does anybody know what it means in English?
Yeah. Out of many, one.
Out of many, one. That, I think, is the best translation. Short and quite close to the Latin, out of many, one. Does anybody know the importance of this statement here in the United States? Anyone else? It was the American motto, the de facto American motto from 1782 until 1956. So pretty good run as the country's motto. It's a 13-letter phrase. I mean, the phrase was chosen in part because the 13 letters reflected the 13 colonies that were united in a single federal arrangement under a single federal government. And that's partly where even the phrase itself has 13 letters that are united as one, and that was the original meaning, was the 13 colonies united under one government. And that's why this E Pluribus Unum in Latin was placed on the American seal. Now, some look at it today and say that it was quite a prescient phrase to choose because of the cultural meaning that it has today, invoking an ideal of American democracy to unite peoples of many backgrounds and many religions and cultures under a single flag and a shared democracy. And although this motto now stands for a long-standing American ideal, some feel that it's maybe further out of reach in recent years. With the growing political polarization, and Pew Research has been documenting this, and certainly political polarization can be shown to be growing, wealth disparity, and racism fragmenting the body politic. Rooted in ancient Greek philosophy, E Pluribus Unum is based upon the Pythagorean ideal of friendship, where the love of the other unifies the friends as one. And it is this profound social meaning on the possibility of a genuine unity forged across the borders of identity that I'm interested in. And many, I think, would suggest that this challenge of drawing people together from diverse religious, cultural, racial, economic, and ideological entities into a common solidarity remains the great challenge of America. It is, of course, a pressing global issue as well. So this talk is premised on the following question. What might Islam have to contribute to this timely challenge? How might Islam's rich intellectual tradition provide us with some conceptual tools to navigate the contemporary social issue of making one out of many? So that's the main question that we'll try to work on a little bit today. Now, before we answer that, and actually maybe I'll go back here to the talk outline, and I did practice how to say this in German, but for any of those who are German speakers, this may be offensive to your ears, so I'll apologize for that. And I'll apologize a few times throughout the talk because I'm Canadian, so you might notice that. Okay, so there's this historical approach called Geistesgeschichte. I think that's how you say it. I actually listened to it online over and over, and then practicing it so I wouldn't make a total fool of myself standing up here trying to say this giant German word. It was coined by Friedrich Schlegel in 1808, and it means the history of mind or spirit. The history of mind or spirit. It's from this school of thought that we get the term zeitgeist. Has anyone heard that term before? The spirit of the time? In particular, Geistesgeschichte, I think I'm still getting it, refers to a mode of analysis that investigates the big ideas that underpin our time and our culture. It's an approach that believes ideas have consequences. Now, certainly ideas aren't the only thing shaping our lives, but the assumption that ideas do shape how we live underpins this approach. Sometimes when people think of this debate, they might think of sociology with Max Weber and Karl Marx. And Marx tended to see ideas and culture as being caused by material conditions. He didn't really think that ideas had a causal role in human society and history. And Max Weber, I think, tended to see it as a bit more dialectical in the sense of a bit of a back and forth relationship between material influence and the influence of ideas. And of course, he also believed that ideas had great influence. And I myself am somebody that believes that's the case. So it is in the spirit of Geistesgeschichte that I take seriously some of the big ideas that come out of the Islamic tradition. These ideas are ones that have animated Muslim engagements with people from other faiths. And I think these ideas are still relevant to us today as we try to envision a broader human unity alongside a simultaneous recognition of pluralism and difference. And I think that is one of the great challenges of our time. Now, some people, I think, today, in the face of globalization, want to retreat back into the sameness of a shared identity. And we're seeing this globally. We're seeing it with politics in the United States. We're seeing it in politics in the United Kingdom with Brexit. We're seeing it in places like Turkey with an increasingly identitarian and authoritarian move on the government there. We're seeing it in India with the rise of Hindutva or Hindu nationalist organizations. It seems like in the face of a growing global unity, there is a reaction and a pullback and a desire to fall back into a sort of isolated our identity first. And frankly, I don't think it's workable. I don't think it's sustainable. And I don't think it's the most productive way to go about relating with each other. I think we have to learn to live in relationship, to live with, not live against. Now, my PhD supervisor, Professor Mina Sharifi Funk, who I've written these two recent books with, her PhD supervisor was Professor Abdulaziz Saeed, who is the founder of the Peace and Conflict Program at the American University in Washington, D.C. And he has the saying that the whole world needs the whole world. It's kind of an interesting one, actually, if you think about it a little bit. That the whole world needs the whole world means that when we look at all of the different cultures and religions around the world, there's something that we can benefit from all of them. And I don't think that's just a sort of hallmark card sentiment. I think that that is actually accurate. And I think that the Islamic tradition has developed a very sophisticated philosophy of unity and diversity, of oneness and manyness. And I think it's a philosophy that is worth us considering today. Now, this talk is not a panacea to all of our current social ills. I don't think it's going to solve the world's problems. Again, I'm sorry if that was the expectation. I'll apologize again. And I also want to qualify that the ideas that I'm going to explore today, that we will explore today, do not represent Islam as a whole. As like any great nexus of religion and culture, the term Islam encompasses historical phenomena too vast to be comprehensively represented with any ease or accuracy. This is actually one of the problems in our current discourse about Islam. We often say things like, well, what does Islam say about that? The problem is Islam hasn't said a word for 1,400 years. Islam doesn't say anything, doesn't talk. Muslims speak for Islam, and they do so in different ways. It's interesting, Muslims themselves actually recognize this fairly early on in Islamic history. There is the Prophet Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, also his fourth successor, or Khalifa, Ali ibn Abi Talib, potentially one of the most famous Muslims after Prophet Muhammad himself. And he famously said on this point, the Quran, the scripture of Islam, the Quran is the authority, but the Quran is merely a text placed between two covers. It does not speak. It is humans who speak through it. a very early statement of what we might call the hermeneutical, which is just a fancy word for interpretive principle. But scholars like to use slightly more fancy words to describe things. I think it makes it sound cool. Now, some of you here today might be open and even enthusiastic about considering Islamic traditions and attempting to think through contemporary American social challenges. But I think it might be worthwhile to briefly make the case for the relevance of Islam to American culture. These connections will also serve as a doorway onto a few of the Islamic conceptions of pluralism I hope to explore this evening. So why talk about Islam when we're talking about contemporary America? First of all, Islam was pickled in the same Near Eastern juices as Christianity. They grew up in the same neighborhood. Both religions are heirs to the Roman Empire, its laws and its political formations. Both Islam and Christianity are heirs to Greek philosophy, its syllogistic reasoning, and metaphysics of transcendent unity. Both Islam and Christianity offer a universalization of Hebrew monotheism, generally framed within the Near Eastern tradition of centralizing empire. Hence, Islam is not so much an other as it is a brother to Christianity in a historical, philosophical, theological, and cultural sense. Now, this hasn't precluded some sibling rivalry between the two, as we're all aware. But Christianity, the religion that has had the largest role in shaping American culture historically, can count Islam as one of its closest relatives and historical conversation partners. More particularly, traces of the Islamic ideas that I want to discuss tonight can be found not far from Evansville. And that brings us to Abdelkader, Iowa. Now, to maybe jump the gun a little bit, does anybody know where this name comes from? Perfect. And I've chosen the right subject for the talk. Abdelkader, Iowa, sitting along the Turkey River, surrounded by cornfields and dairy farms, it stands as the only town in America named after an Arab Muslim saint, philosopher, and warrior. It is named after an individual named Abdelkader al-Jazairi. The al-Qadr became somewhat Americanized as Abdelkader. Abdelkader al-Jazairi died in Damascus, Syria in 1883, and he was the leader of the Algerian resistance to the French colonial invasion of the 1830s. He was also a Muslim scholar, a Muslim mystic, we'll talk a little bit more about this, or Sufi, a term that, again, I'll explain a bit further to the talk, and also a philosopher. So, we have our first question here. How did a small town in Iowa, I think last census it's about 1,200 people, how did a small town in the American Midwest come to be named after an Algerian Muslim anti-colonial resistance fighter and mystic? Well, at the height of his fame, Abdelkader was read about all over the world. Here's a picture of him there. At this point, this was later in his years, you can see he has a bunch of French medals that he's wearing, which is also quite interesting considering he fought the French for 40 years. So the fact that they eventually gave him a bunch of medals tells you something kind of interesting about this figure, and we'll get to know a fair amount more. Americans were reading about Abdelkader in popular magazines, like Littell's Living Age. Has anyone here seen like Reader's Digest, Time magazine, right? People. Littell's Living Age was one of those of its time. And Americans would read about Abdelkader in the 1830s and 40s and 50s and 60s. All throughout those decades, he was a household name. The founders of Abdelkader were moved by the tales of his courage, his nobility, his fighting skill, but also his kindness, his ever willingness to make peace with his French foes, freeing prisoners of war. Further, his resistance to French colonial domination resonated with the American cultural memory of fighting off the British. And later in his life, when he freed thousands of Christians from anti-Christian riots in Syria, he was a hero not only to Algerians and Arabs and Muslims, but he was a hero to Americans, British, and even the French, whom he fought for decades. Bless him. So I'll read an excerpt from the yearbook of the Abdelkader High School class of 1915. Such is the history of the man for whom our town is named, a scholar, a philosopher, a lover of liberty, a champion of his religion, a born leader of men, a great soldier, a capable administrator, a pervasive orator, a chivalrous opponent. The selection was well made, and with those pioneers of 70 years ago, we do honor the shade. Kind of interesting to think about that in a 1915 high school yearbook in Iowa, celebrating an Algerian, Arab, Muslim warrior and philosopher. So let's talk a little bit more about how he got so famous. What was his life story that led to this town in Iowa to be founded in his name? Abdelkader is born in Western Algeria in 1808 to a noble family that traced its descent to the Prophet Muhammad. Also a family of Sufis. And I should maybe here say a few words about Sufism. And actually in Professor Brown's class earlier today, we talked a little bit about this. But I'll say just a few things about it here, for those of you who are not familiar. First of all, who here has heard of Sufism? That's pretty impressive, I have to say. That is actually very impressive. From my biased perspective, that speaks well to your university. I've spoken at other universities where one or two half hands, you know, you're kind of like, maybe I've heard of it. But these were a great many. So Sufism, one of the ways to think about it, Muslims, the way they saw this historically was that Islam had an outward knowledge and an inward knowledge. You know, in Christianity, it might be thought of as the law and the spirit, and that the two have an integral relationship. One of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad was that there is no daily prayer without the presence of heart. One Sufi poet said, if you're praying and you're thinking of something else, you're no better than the hens or chickens plucking away, you know, joking about the fact that when Muslims pray, they bow and prostrate. And he said, well, you're not really doing much more than them, unless there's presence of heart. So Muslims have long been interested in the inward, the knowledge of the heart, of the spirit. And that's really what Sufis came to specialize in, just like the jurists of Islam specialized in Sharia, or the law, the laws guiding the religion. So we can think of Islam as having an inward and an outward aspect, and Sufism was the word that eventually became used for the inward aspect. And in the medieval period, Sufism crystallizes as a series of religious orders. And Abdelkader was born into a family that was leading a religious Sufi order. Now I will say, although for centuries and centuries and centuries Sufism was assumed to be an absolutely integral part of Islam, recent decades have seen some serious challenges to the place of Sufism within the Islamic tradition. Notably, extremist movements like Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, or un-Islamic State, as many Muslims like to call them, target Sufis, Sufi shrines, Sufi mosques, Sufi centers. Recently in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, there was a very sad attack on a Sufi mosque there. Over 300 people were killed. So Sufism is now becoming a little bit more controversial, but again, in Abdelkader's time, in the early 1800s, it would have just been assumed as a very natural part of the Islamic tradition. So Abdelkader grows up in Western Algeria. His first teacher is his mother, Lala Zahra. His mother he keeps with him his entire life. Everywhere he went, he brought his mother. She taught him the basics of Islam. She taught him the Quran. And we'll later see that she played a role in the war with the French. And I'll tell you a little bit about what that was. Now, in studying the Quran, Abdelkader learns that there is a pluralism in the Quran, which is maybe not the first word that some people think of when they think of that book. But I'll read you just a few short verses to give you a sense of some of the Quranic verses that would have shaped his thought. This is chapter 5, verse 48, for those of you who want to look it up. It says, "For each of you we have established a law and a way. Had God willed, he could have made you one community. But that he might try you by which he has given you, he has made you many. So compete with one another in good works. Unto God you will return, and he will inform you of that wherein you differed." So there's a statement here saying people could have been one community, but they are many communities. That's in the nature of things. That's according to God's will, and that it's not a grounds for conflict, it's a grounds to compete with one another in doing good. And that you won't solve the problems, you won't solve the differences of religion in this life. That people will return to God and he will inform them of what it was that they differed on. Here's another verse. This is chapter 2, verse 62. This actual statement occurs twice in the Quran. "Truly those who believe, and the Jews, and the Christians, and the Sabians, whoever believes in God in the last day, the day of judgment, and performs virtuous deeds, surely their reward is with God, and no fear shall come upon them, nor shall they grieve." Interesting statement in the sense that it's saying that Jews and Christians and others who have faith and do good will not have any fear or will grieve on the day of judgment. The final verse I'll read, and then we'll get back to Abdelkader's life. This is verse 136 from chapter 2. "Say, we believe in God, and that which was revealed unto Abraham and Ishmael, and Isaac and Jacob, and the tribes, and that which was given unto Moses and Jesus, and the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and unto him we have submitted." So, Abdelkader is studying the Quran with his mother. Later, he studies the works of Islamic law. He also studies veterinary medicine because he does some animal herding, and he's into caring for horses and horse riding. Now, his young life was quite idyllic in a sense, drawn out between religious study, Sufi practice, the practice of the inward teachings of Islam, learning about the outward sciences, horsemanship. The clouds of war were gathering over Algeria. A post-Napoleonic France had set its sights on the country. It had lost colonies in America. And some in the French administration said North Africa is a site where we can recover imperial glory, material resources, and regional influence. They started the invasion of Algeria in May of 1830. And of course, with the unmatched force of modern military technology, they quickly took over. Now here's where Abdelkader's fame first begins. In 1832, the chiefs of the 7 main tribes of Western Algeria asked Abdelkader to be their leader at the tender age of 24. He already had something of a reputation for religious piety and for courage, and he proved to be a popular choice, even among the Jews and Christians of Western Algeria, who came to pay him allegiance when they heard of his nomination. During the next decade and a half of warfare against the French, he increasingly draws the admiration of the French. The famous French literary figure, Victor Hugo, praised Abdelkader, referring to him as, and I'm going to say this in French, and it's less practiced than the German word, and unfortunately Professor Brown has insisted that my French is awful. But we'll give it a try, and we'll see if it's gotten any better. Victor Hugo describes Abdelkader as le beau soldat, le beau prêtre. She rolled her eyes a little bit. It's okay. The handsome soldier, the handsome priest. His most stalwart opponents in the French military respected him as a tactical genius. But for Abdelkader's followers, they called him Emir al-Mu'minin, an old Muslim term meaning commander of the faithful, commander of the believers. They just called him the Emir. The Emir. He fought the French until his capture in 1847. That would be 17 years after the French invasion began. Now, before that time, he was always willing to abide by peace treaties and to make peace treaties. In 1841, General Bugeaud, who had previously signed a peace treaty with Abdelkader, returned to Algeria, and there was impatience in France. They said, finish the job. He had the express goal of expediting the conquest and establishing permanent French colonies. He insisted if we win this war, we do it with the gloves off. The British press soon called General Bugeaud the butcher of the Bedouin due to his scorched earth policy. Any tribes aligned with Abdelkader, this is what the French told them, could expect to have their harvests torched, their orchids chopped down, their livestock seized, tents burned, men decapitated, women and children left destitute or imprisoned. And that's what General Bugeaud proceeded to do. One of his officers wrote in his diary that he would execute his orders punctually. He said, quote, I shall burn everything and kill everyone. It was now the approach of the French. It is during this period of French brutality that Abdelkader's character becomes apparent. In contrast to this brutality, he shows remarkable humanity, beginning to win hearts and minds even as he lost ground in Algeria. If he could no longer feed French prisoners, he freed them and sent them back to the French. For him, the way of the Prophet Muhammad meant caring for prisoners humanely. Interestingly, he sent all female French prisoners to stay with, who else? His mother, Lala Zahra. When people asked him, why do you send female French prisoners to stay with your mother? He says, I don't trust my men to care for them appropriately, but I know that my mother will care for them. Whoa. Okay. That may have been my fault. I was kind of playing with the lights earlier.
It always does that.
And I feared that I might sabotage it, so. But now you can see the slides better.
There.
Okay. So word gets out. He's sending prisoners to his mother. He's freeing them when he can't feed them. He becomes more popular, but he loses the war. In 1847, he surrenders. He said, if I thought that I could actually defeat the French, I would continue to fight to defend my homeland. But I realized at some point I will only cause more destruction to my people. And he didn't think it was worth doing that. So he surrenders on the condition that he can go to Egypt or Syria. The French agree, and then, due to politics, remove the agreement and say, sorry, you're going to be exiled in France. They place him under house arrest there. He spent 5 years in France. Some of his family and followers died due to ill health. They were given limited resources. And yet his celebrity only grows. Initially, the local French were horrified that one of their martial foes was being housed next to them. But more people, he had an open door policy. He said, anyone can come and talk to me. French generals go to visit him to talk about the battles they'd shared. Bishops, Christian bishops, go to discuss religion. People write to him, he writes back. The locals go to meet him. They're all impressed by his serenity, impeccable manners, graciousness, hospitality, dignity. When General Bugeaud, the butcher of the Bedouin, died, Abdelkader wrote a letter of condolence to his family, saying the many ways that he respected the old French warrior. During his time in France, he develops a keen interest in Christianity. He meets, as I said, with bishops and priests. He reads an Arabic translation of the Bible. He describes having a vision of Abraham that inspired him to be, quote, a sign of the oneness of God, the merciful, patient, and loving God for all people. He was a deeply devout Muslim throughout his life, but was always respectful of the piety and compassion he saw among Christians. He prayed with the head priest of the Madeleine in Paris. He had a profound respect for the Dominican Sisters of Charity that were assigned to care for him while in France. He wrote a letter to Sister Natalie, describing her as, quote, a shining mirror of goodness, made from the purest mother of pearl. In her we have seen only a deep attachment to her religion and a perfect intelligence. For her part, Sister Natalie wrote of Abdelkader that, allowing for certain exceptions of a theological nature, there is no Christian virtue that he does not practice to the highest degree. His allies in France grow. The British start to notice and call him the caged hawk. The French populace, initially so hostile to him, grew to regard him with affection, and his time, I should say, was in Bordeaux. So the locals in Bordeaux gather enough signatures to put Abdelkader on the French presidential election ballot. They nominate him for president of the Republic, somebody that had fought for decades. Finally, due to popular demand, Napoleon III has to free him. He says, okay, we'll grant you passage to Turkey, and we'll give you something of a stipend from the French government. Probably also to not start any further rebellions. So 1860, Emir Abdelkader moves his family for one last time, this time to the ancient city of Damascus. He's greeted with popular acclaim. Local Arabs celebrate him as a descendant of the Prophet, a religious scholar, a Sufi, a famed warrior, all things that troubled the Turkish Ottoman authorities at the time. They were keeping a close eye on him. And the Ottomans were also becoming uneasy as European powers pressed them to grant Christians in Lebanon and Syria more rights than they traditionally had under Ottoman law. The Ottomans finally get fed up and decide that the Christians need an ominous correction. And they start trying to stir up local Muslim sects against the Christians, to try to get some riots going to teach them a lesson. Abdelkader hears about this, and he writes the French and says, Christians in Syria are under threat, riots are about to break out, send me weapons, and I'll protect them. The French do. They send him weapons, and in July of 1860, anti-Christian riots break out. He organizes his men, and they begin escorting European diplomats, priests and nuns, and local Syrian Christians to his substantial compound, until they had over 1,000 refugees there from the riots. The local mob finds Abdelkader sheltering thousands of Christians and demands that he hands them over. He warns them against violating God's law and shedding innocent blood. They demand the Christians, and he responds, as long as one of my soldiers is still standing, you will not touch them. They are my guests, murderers of women and children, you sons of sin. Try to take one of these Christians and you will learn how my soldiers fight. The crowd dispersed. Abdelkader continued with his men to escort thousands of Christians to Beirut, and estimates of the numbers he saved rose to the multiple thousands. Now, of course, the French media lauds him even more. They say this is our former foe, and yet he fought, Christian French soldiers for decades, and now he's saving Christians by the thousands. President Abraham Lincoln was so impressed that he sent the emir 2 finely engraved, custom-made Colt pistols. His global celebrity was cemented. During his final decades in Damascus, doing what he'd always wanted to do, by the way, which was studying Sufi philosophy and the Quran and the sayings of Muhammad. During the final years of his life in Damascus, he received visitors from all over the world. And when he finally died in 1883, his death was counted as a loss for the world by the New York Times, which described him as, quote, among the foremost of the few great men of the century. Throughout his life, Abdelkader was known for his strict adherence to the law of the Quran and to the Prophet Muhammad's way. And yet this adherence to the outward elements of Islam coincided with a profound devotion to Islam's tradition of inward spirituality, Sufism, and to one of Sufism's most important figures. And that's where we'll start to turn now. An individual named Ibn al-Arabi, who also died in Damascus 600 or so years earlier. When Abdelkader first entered Damascus, this is just an example of his devotion to this Sufi figure that we'll be talking about, Ibn al-Arabi. One would expect him to seek an audience with the Ottoman ruler. One would expect him to want to go to the great Umayyad mosque in the heart of the city, which is quite a beautiful mosque for anyone who has been there. It was actually a Roman temple to the god Jupiter. And then it was a Christian church, and now it's a mosque. And it still apparently has the head of John the Baptist. One would think that's where Abdelkader would go. But no, he asked to go to the tomb and mosque of Ibn al-Arabi, the famous Sufi saint who died in the 13th century. Although Abdelkader was famous for his accomplishments on the battlefield, what was much less publicized was his intensive spirituality that was so foundational to his life. Just gonna check the time and see how we're doing. Okay. A French spy who infiltrated his inner circle described Abdelkader as always in prayer. Between his 5 daily prayers, he's constantly touching the prayer beads. He fasts at least once a week. So he didn't eat at least 1 day a week and often didn't eat for 2. He wakes up at night to pray for a third or half of the night, following, of course, the Prophet Muhammad's practice. So he was very devout and very committed to the thought of this individual, Ibn al-Arabi, who will conclude our talk with looking at some of his thought. That's a picture of Ibn al-Arabi's mosque in Damascus. It's quite a beautiful place. I was able to go there in 2010, right before the Civil War, the very unfortunate Civil War broke out. Quite a beautiful place, and so classic of the Middle East. You kind of have to wade through a outdoor lingerie market to get to his mosque, which to me just summarizes old cities in the Middle East. It's just a mix of everything. Shrines and markets and all just mixed up together in kind of a beautiful chaos. So some of the ideas that animated Abdelkader's life come from this individual, Ibn al-Arabi. He is sometimes called the Sheikh al-Akbar. It means the greatest master. And certainly for Sufis, he's seen as one of their greatest lights. He was actually born in Murcia, Spain, which under Muslims was known as Al-Andalus. Again, traveled widely but settled and died in Damascus. Ibn al-Arabi was incredibly prolific. And if you can't read that too easily, I'm again happy to email slides or anything, so feel free to ask. Ibn al-Arabi, very prolific, he wrote over 400 books, one of which was multiple thousands of pages long. Some, of course, were much shorter, but regardless, he was incredibly prolific. He had a philosophy that was later called wahdat al-wujud, which means the oneness of being. Ibn al-Arabi said that only God truly has being or existence, and that the cosmos is a sort of borrowed existence, that is sort of a mixture of being and illusion. And because only God has being and God is one, being itself, existence itself is one. And this can get quite complex, but I'll give you just a little analogy. To illustrate this. Ibn al-Arabi was fond of describing this approach. He said if you have a single light shone through, think of like a kaleidoscope, right? You get all of these colors, and out of the kaleidoscope comes a rainbow of diverse colors. It appears to be many, but it's really just a single light. A single light filtered through different colors, different forms. That was something of an analogy he used to describe this philosophy. Now, it was controversial. Many Muslims loved it. Some despised it. But I just gave one example here that I'll speak to very briefly, and then we'll continue to move on, of people who loved Ibn al-Arabi. Interestingly, the Ottomans loved Ibn al-Arabi. The last great Islamic empire, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, which had something like a 500-600-year run, very long-standing dynasty, the Ottomans were very much into Ibn al-Arabi's works. The mosque you see there was built, or the original one was built by Selim I, an Ottoman sultan, who, that was one of the first things he did when they defeated the Mamluks and took over Syria. He built a mosque around Ibn al-Arabi's tomb. The Ottomans liked Ibn al-Arabi so much that in 1534, they published a fatwa, or a religious ruling, mandating the study of his works in Islamic universities. Okay, now we can look at how his thought would influence Abdelkader. Here's Abdelkader writing on Ibn al-Arabi's thought. Our God, as well as the God of the Christians and the Jews and all of the diverging religions, is one, just as he has taught us. But he has revealed himself to us through a different manifestation than that by which he has manifested himself in his revelation to the Christians and to the Jews. All of that results from the diversity of God's revelations, which is a function of the multiplicity of those to whom the revelations are destined, and the diversity of their predispositions. As a result of God manifesting himself in diverse ways to diverse people, said Ibn al-Arabi and Abdelkader, the world is full of many religions, creeds, philosophies, none of which encompasses God in his totality. Abdelkader continues commenting on Ibn al-Arabi's thought. None of God's creatures worships God in all of his aspects. And no one is unfaithful to God in all of his aspects. He says, if all know God in some respects and not others, then, quote, error does not exist in the world except in a relative manner. The result of this perspective is, first of all, an intellectual and religious humility. You have to acknowledge the limitations of your own religious view. No one has a monopoly on truth. No one has a comprehensive or final word on God. The second result is a respect for all religions and beliefs. Just as no one religion encompasses the entire truth, no one religion is totally devoid of truth about God. And hence each belief offers a window onto one of God's qualities. And no belief encompasses them all. Ibn al-Arabi wrote in the 13th century, created beings have formed various beliefs about God. He said, for me, I believe everything that they believe. Abdelkader proclaimed, again commenting on Ibn al-Arabi's thought, if you think that God is what the schools of Islam profess and believe, God is that, and he is other than that. If you think that God is what the diverse communities believe, Muslims, Christians, Jews, others, God is that, and he is other than that. Now I'll just show you a little bit, and again, I know I put too much text on slides. It's something that as professors you're not really supposed to do, but I'm really struggling to narrow down the slides a little bit. This is a summary of Ibn al-Arabi's thought and Abdelkader's, and I would argue that it is ideas like this that underpin his remarkable openness. And of course the verses in the Quran as well that we read earlier in the talk. In himself, God cannot be constrained by any belief. God cannot be fit into any one belief. He is able to assume the form of every belief precisely because he is incomparable with or beyond every belief. Adequate knowledge of God as he is in himself demands seeing him as disclosed in every belief and yet non-delimited by belief. Those perfected human beings who perfect their knowledge of God recognize the truth of every belief, but also the limitation, right? All beliefs offer a piece of the puzzle, but none offers the entirety of the puzzle itself. Standing in the station of no station, this is again where it gets kind of mystical, the placeless place, the station of no station. This drives people crazy. They read this and go, what are you talking about? Standing in the station of no station, they acknowledge the rights of every station, the rights of every belief, for each corresponds to one of the infinitely varied self-disclosures of God. So, to conclude, how might this principle be applied to contemporary cultural problems? One, such a perspective holds that every deeply held human belief, whether religious, cultural, philosophical, deserves two things. One, to be honored for at least having some truth. Ibn Arabi and Abdelkader say there is no absolute error in the cosmos. There's always some truth. And to be recognized as not having all of the truth. One analogy, I'll just say briefly here. I was thinking about trying to explain this, and I thought, well, if you think of this room, I think we'd all agree there's one room that we're in. And yet, there is no one experience of this room. There's no one overarching room or experience of it. There are, each one of us is having a slightly different perspective on this room. You're seeing things behind me that I'm not seeing, and I'm seeing things behind you that you're not seeing. There is as many subjective experiences and perspectives on this room as there are people in the room. And yet, ultimately, the room is one. So, one sort of way to think about how we all have a piece of the puzzle, but nobody has the whole puzzle. If we truly digest an idea like this, we can hold our own culture and philosophy and religion to be of great value in its particularity, while also acknowledging its inevitable limitations. And we can also simultaneously honor the culture and religions of others, while also acknowledging their limitations. Now, again, for Ibn Arabi, who is a devout Muslim, as was Abdelkader, Ibn Arabi summarizes this in a short poem that I'd like to end with. He describes the full realization of this as leading to the religion of love. And there I've got a picture of a Turkish art form. It's in Arabic calligraphy that says Allah Muhabba, which means God is love, or God is the beloved. And this is a line from Ibn Arabi's famous poem called the Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, or the Interpreter of Desires. My heart has become capable of every form. It is a pasture for gazelles, and a convent for Christian monks, and a temple for idols. It's the pilgrim's Kaaba. And the tablets of the Torah and the book of the Quran, I follow the religion of love. Whatever way love's camels take, that is my religion, that is my faith. Leave it there. Thank you very much, everyone.